So I talk about myself first, right?
In fact, we're starting to record, so you might as well just go.
All right. Hey, hi everybody. My name is Stephen Powels. I'm the brewmaster at Boulevard in Kansas City. So Boulevard has been around since '89. It was started by John McDonald, who was a carpenter actually and a home brewer. And he fell in love with Belgian beer after traveling to France to meet up with his fiance in those days, and now his wife. So he would buy Belgian beers here in the US, and it's like, these beers are not the same as they are back in France or in Europe. And he thought, like, hey, if I can make him, I'm probably gonna make him fresher than that. He started the brewery in '89. I came on board 10 years later in '99. I'm originally from Belgium, so excuse my accent. And I came on board just because, he always had that kind of mission in mind that he wanted to make Belgian beers. So lots of.
Were you a brewer in Belgium as well, or?
I was, yeah. It's somewhat in my blood, I think. My dad worked in a brewery. My grandfather actually worked in a malt house. And when I was a young kid, a high school kid, I needed money like every high school kid. And I would ask my dad, I need money. What can I do? He's like, well, son, you better work for it. And they have work for you in the brewery. So I would work in the brewery in summers, and then, worked different ways up. And then in the end, I worked in the lab in the brewery, in the local brewery. And my goal in life was to live in that small town, ride my bike to work, and be the brewmaster in a small brewery. But that didn't work out after a big brewery bought it, and then they funked it basically. So I had to kind of start looking around. I worked in a brew pub for a while. Worked at another brewery that Leafmans was part of, so sour beers, and then I ended up here in Kansas City.
Can you tell us kind of the history of Belgian brewing in general? I mean, I know you guys have been doing it for generations, and have perfected a lot of it, right? You're respected worldwide for the beers you guys make, and there's a lot of rules. Is that accurate?
Do I need to explain the history of Belgian brewing? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's not Germany. We're not so that's the big difference, between Germany and Belgium. Is Germany has the Reinheitsgebot from 13 something, and we don't care about that. We just want to make anything and as good as possible. So that's why Belgian beers is such a wide variety. We have from Pilsner all the way to the monks that make the Trappist beers, to the Gueuze and the Lambics that they are fermented without inoculation of yeast. So I mean, you have a wide range of different beers. And I mean, one day I'll show you the map of Belgium. You can actually look at spots in Belgium and really see regions where one beer is specifically very strong, like the Lambics and the Gueuze around Brussels. Brown sour beers in the West Flanders, and then around Roeselare you have the red sour beers like Rodenbach and stuff. And they all have a reason why they're there. It's a long history, but there's one line that runs through all of these. And you know what that is? Taxation. Tax. That's really the reason why certain beers are certain ways, and it's always the same thing. I think you can probably write a book about mankind and taxation, and that's why the reason history is that way too, I guess. But yeah, that's how.
So how did you get recruited by John himself, or how did you end up at the Kansas City operation?
Yeah. Do you want the romantic story or just the reality?
Oh, definitely romantic.
Oh, the romantic is sitting at the bar next to this nice blonde lady, and she's like, "Hey, I'm from Kansas City. You all want to come down over here?" But that's not true. Actually, I saw an ad in the paper, right? Actually, and I was going to a college at that time and doing some work on sensory, and there was an ad like, "Hey, this brewery in Kansas City is looking for a brewer, or a head brewer," and I replied to it, and I ended up here. Little did I know, I came over on Super Bowl in '99. I didn't even know that football was not played with your foot. and I didn't know that a ball could be an egg.
So one of the interesting things on the website that one of the coworkers here at Fifth and Wine pointed out today was on your website. It said that he sold his house in order to begin the financing of the original brewery, and we were wondering if he was married at the time when he did that. Because I said there's no way that a wife would let you sell your house to start a brewery. Do you know of that answer?
He was not married at the time. That's true. The interesting fact is the brewery has been here since '99, and his bathroom with the bathtub is still here. It's just around the corner of my office. And his bedroom used to be our conference room for a long time.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting story because they had to be one of the very first of the micros in your area, I think, right? Kansas City.
Oh yeah. Boulevard was the main brewery in the Midwest for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, about the same story as Larry Bell with Bell's, about the same time. Larry Bell Summit in St. Paul, around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. So anyway, anything more about the brewery? Like you guys, I know, sold to a Belgian company, right?
Yeah. So we're part of Duvel, which is a family-owned brewery, fifth generation. They own several breweries, a couple of in the U.S. And I think in total about 9 different breweries. It's good to be part of that. Duvel is the world-class beer. It's great to be part of that.
Do they come over and consult with you, or do you guys consult together? Do you go to Belgium and kind of see what they're doing too, or what's the collaboration between you guys?
Actually, in the U.S. we collaborate quite a bit. So Firestone Walker is part of this too, and Omegang is, and between the three we collaborate quite a bit. When I have technical questions, there's a lot of knowledge in Belgium, a lot of knowledge. And that's really great to have that, that really close by, all that connection. Yeah.
What's the production? How many barrels or bottles or whatever? I mean, you guys are a big operation now, right?
Yeah, I think we're just under 200, about 190,000 barrels or something like that. So yeah, good size.
Yeah, and you're in charge of all that beer?
Somebody has to do it,
And one of my other favorite questions always is when you're not drinking beer, because when we talk to wine people, they say it takes a lot of beer to make good wine.
Yeah.
So you must get tired of beer once in a while.
I do, and I drink quite a bit of wine also. Nice. I'm not a big fan of distilled, so a lot of brewers are big into whiskeys and bourbons and stuff. I'm not. I drink a lot of beer, but I also drink my fair amount of wine also.
Yeah. Do you guys do any food pairings with beer? We kind of interested in doing that here at our store because we have a license where we can serve, but I've never really done a beer dinner. Have you done some of those?
Oh yeah, plenty. Yep. We've done a lot of different food pairings. Actually, we used to have a lunch every, I think, third Friday of the month at the brewery where we would pair new beers and with different courses. And we would work with all the chefs in Kansas City. It was hard to convince the first one, but once they heard the news, they all wanted to be part of this. And it was amazing. It was, for the chefs, it was very, creative, and they could do things that they normally wouldn't do. And they could really go outside the box. Yeah.
We did some mussels with an IPA from a local brewery up in Kalispell, Montana. And instead of putting white wine in butter, we did an IPA, and people loved it. It was, very interesting. So I'm very interested in doing that. We got to get on that. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean the Belgians and beer and cooking, it's just it's part of their genes also. But when it comes to beer, especially when you talk about IPAs, in my opinion, you should use the IPA as a spice. So you use it at the end. You basically boil your mussels, toss them around, get the juice out, the liquid out, and then pour the IPA in it, just flash it and close it. You keep all the flavors in it. Yeah. And it seems like that's what you were doing, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Otherwise, the hard part with beer is the bitterness,
right.
And it just becomes too much. Yeah.
And I think cheese is a big deal in your culture too, right?
Yeah.
And cheese and beer is awesome to me. That's my favorite pairing. That kind of a stinky European cheese and some nice fresh beer is a great combination, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is I mean, wine has nice acidity, but in the end, when you really want to clean up that fattiness on your tongue and in your mouth, the carbonation really scrubs it off and really helps it to cleanse. Yeah, but they're a good pairing. That's why the Trappists always make cheese and beer because it's a pairing made in heaven, right?
Right.
For the Trappists, yeah.
Right. Jeff, do you have any questions for Stephen here?
I was actually kind of curious. Belgium, they use the phrase cuisine à la bière because it's so embedded in their culture that they believe in locally produced beer with locally grown or produced food as well. Is there a particular beer or food pairing that's really stood out in your mind? Yeah.
In Belgium, a food pairing that's
not even in Belgium, but I know it's a big part of your culture. Have you had a beer and food? It was just transcendent.
That's a great question. Stoverij, basically a stew with beer, is kind of very, very traditional in Belgium. But I tell you one thing, I once went to the area where they grow poperingen, where they grow hops, and I had a 5-course meal of hop shoots. Hop shoots, they're basically like white asparagus, but smaller and thinner. And I had this pairing, and it was the last one was caramelized hop shoots, and we had to taste it with West Vleteren and with St. Bernardus. And those two breweries are next to each other. And there's always the claim which one is the real one, and we had to guess which beer was it. And that with caramelized hop shoots, I mean, it's like, hello, can I get any better than this? That was pretty amazing.
That's fun. Yeah, really fun. Anything else, Jeff, before we get down to beer tasting?
It was interesting too that you mentioned mussels.
Are they almost done? I think so.
Belgium, and a lot of times they prepare the mussels with a Gurza or a wheat beer or something, and then serve.
Did you punch out?
I'm gonna punch in. So wrote it down.
Perfect.
Are you getting that, Stephen? You're kind of breaking up on us, Jeff.
Yeah, I don't hear that. I'm sorry.
I was just pointing out that it was interesting. Mark had mentioned mussels because mussels and fries is a very popular dish in Belgium, and a lot of times prepared with a wheat beer or a Gurza, and then served with one as well. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and as for I love wheat beer and saison to pair with meals. Do you have one or two beers that you always have in your fridge? Just out of curiosity.
So the one beer that's really the best food pairing beer that we have is Tank 7. So I was in Belgium at one point, and I was at a brewery, and they were making a beer for do you know the restaurant called Noma in Copenhagen? It was one of the best or rated best restaurants.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never been to it, but I've heard of it. Yep.
Yeah, me neither. They never sent me out to go out and eat at these 4-star restaurants. I don't know why. But I was there at this brewery, and he's like, "Hey, I'm making this beer from Noma, and the chef thinks that this is the best. We worked with the chef, and we think that this is the best food pairing beer." So I'm trying this beer, and I'm like, have you ever heard of Tank 7? He's like, "No." He's like, "Well, that's a beer that we make, and what you made here is it's exactly what we made. It was the same yeast. It was also dry hopped with Amarillo and Citra. It was exactly the same beer." So when we make a beer, when we do beer pairings and we work at a menu, we always look at, okay, this food or this dish works with this and this and that. But then there's always one that we don't know what beer is going to work with it. And always Tank 7, because it works just with everything. I mean, it's a perfect food pairing beer.
Nice.
I love that.
I think we're going to start talking about beers, if that's okay, Stephen. So this is our first one and you said you would also like to maybe talk about both of them, but
yeah,
we can't sample both. We got jobs to do and stuff.
Sorry about that. Sorry to hear you have to work. Yeah, wheat beer is basically what made this brewery big. It's been at one point it was almost 75% of our output was wheat beer, unfiltered wheat beer. And in the early days when John started making this beer, it was a filtered beer because he wasn't able, he had just a little sheet filter. So he would just filter the beer, and the brewers basically talked him into, it's like, hey John, you should change this and make this an unfiltered wheat beer. And we did. They basically filtered the bottom of the cone from the tank, and then the rest of the beer they just transferred and became unfiltered beer, and you would put it in kegs. And at that point, before they did that, John was almost ready to just cancel that beer. He was like, this beer is not going to sell. It's never going to go anywhere. They put the unfiltered wheat beer in draft, and all of a sudden the sales just went through the roof. And then when I came on board, we bought a centrifuge, so we put unfiltered wheat beer in bottles also. But it was amazing that just the perception of just the view, when we talk about beer, we always think about, you know, how it smells, how it tastes. It's also, the vision is also important about the beer. You know, people would buy the beer and would show like, hey, look at me, I have a hazy beer, and you all clowns in this bar, you're all drinking this yellow fuzzy stuff, while I have the cloudy beer from the local brewery. And that really set Boulevard off and really made us a good sized brewery that we are today.
And then the Wheat 100, right?
The Wheat 100 is really new. This is, it's only been on the market for about a month or so. And I thought, well, how hard can it be to make that beer and put it, you know, go to 100 calories? Because wheat beer is not that much more in calories. It's about 150. But people have the perception that wheat, you know, gluten and high protein and carbohydrates and all that, it's gonna make you big or make you fat, or it's very thickening or whatever it is. So we make this 100 calorie beer just to show that, yeah, we can make this beer and make it 100 calorie also. So what you get is not as full flavor as the regular wheat beer, but I think it still has the aroma, but doesn't have the body. So that's how we get to the 100 calorie wheat beer. So I also have to point out that these beers are bottle conditioned, or basically can conditioned. We do that with a lot of our beers. We're a big believer in that. We think that bottle conditioning really helps to round the flavors out of the beer. And so it basically, what we do is the same as champagne. We add a little bit of yeast and sugar, and then there's a fermentation happening in the bottle. So we keep the beer warm for about 10 days for wheat beer. Some of those beers, like the barrel aged, about 3 weeks before we release them. That way, there's really a natural carbonation happening in the beer, and it really, all the flavors gets merged, and it basically enriches the beer. And it helps to make the beer fresher for a longer time.
Fun. Should we move on to the next Space Camper?
Yeah, Space Camper is a beer that we've been making for about 3 years. The main hop in that beer is Eldorado, which is a newer hop. It's been around, well, newer, it's been around for about 8 years or so. And I think IPAs is, of course, every brewery makes IPAs and makes a ton of IPAs. And this was for us like one of the first times that making IPA really put us on the map of IPAs also. We don't make that kind of hazy IPA. This one is somewhat hazy. We're not making those kinds of beers. Maybe we will eventually. But this is somewhat of our approach to a very tropical, fruity, you know, that kind of IPA.
Not overly hoppy though, right?
No, not really. Well, aromatic, yes, but not really bitter. You know, it's about 50 IBUs. It's not like a, you know, West Coast IPA that's 70, 80 IBUs. Should be very approachable. Then its sister or its brother, Giga Hop, is we make these spin-offs on Space Camper, and Giga Hop, for that one we use a lot of New Zealand hops. We should have put that on the label, because New Zealand's hops are really hot right now, or basically I would say Southern Hemisphere hops. So we use quite a bit of Galaxy, Motueka from New Zealand, some really newer varietals. And you as a wine connoisseur, you will know that the best Sauvignon Blanc comes from
The Loire Valley in France.
Loire Valley.
Sancerre.
I'm with you. I like a Sancerre also, but sometimes I like some.
No, I agree. Right.
Super tropical fruit, you know, and you can get that with the same from the Southern Hemisphere with us. So It's amazing how the terroir of the hops also come through in beer, just like in the wine. You know, you get these super tropical aromatics from these hops, while you look at some of the European hops are way more muted and not as outspoken.
It does taste like a New Zealand, like a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I agree. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Jeff, you want to add anything here, buddy?
Oh, I just thought it was kind of curious, or kind of interesting that I read a story about a collab you did where somebody made a whiskey out of your unfiltered wheat beer called Midnight Ritual.
That's true. That's true. Midnight Ritual. It's a small distillery up in Iowa, and they're making whiskeys from brewer's wort. And the first one was with wheat beer. We also made a couple of new ones that are now in barrels. It's a fun project. It's a really fun project. Actually, I have the bottle here. Hold on a second.
Which is
I'm back. Here we go. So it's a whiskey, Midnight Ritual. Foundry is the distillery, and this is made with wheat beer wort, basically. So they fermented it, distilled it, and then aged it in barrels.
nice. So now you have something to drink besides water.
All right, here I go. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to Tank 7, if you would.
Yeah, Tank 7 is it's an interesting story. So Tank 7 is probably the biggest saison out in the US right now. And we started making these what we call smokestack series in 2006. Up till then, we had a really small brew house, and we expanded into a bigger brew house. And this was one of the beers that came in later. So Tank 7, the story of Tank 7 is we were making a saison bread with wild yeast.
We better stop you there. I'm sure Jeff knows that, but tell us what those words mean.
Yeah, bread is Brettanomyces. So it's a wild yeast that makes very earthy notes. And Brettanomyces is known in the winemaking industry. It's a big no-no in the New World winemaking, but or actually they're somewhat developing, but it's very common for some old French in some French wineries. Actually, Cane Cane wines in California and Napa. Yeah, all their wines have a lot of Brettanomyces, and that's just their footprint. So the wild yeast, well, we normally work with Saccharomyces yeast, which is just basically the yeast that makes wine, does fermentation for wine and beer. Brettanomyces is a wild yeast and gives that really funky, wet leather, horsey, that kind of stuff. So it's a different dimension that you give on beer. So that
a lot of Riojas, Tempranillo have Brit in their wineries. I know, because you can really taste the difference between somebody that's kind of that old school, and you can actually taste basement like or something, kind of an odd flavor, and that's what you're talking about is the Brit that they talk about.
Yeah, Brettanomyces, yeah. And it doesn't take much to really come out in aromatics because all those flavor compounds are very low flavor threshold. So we were making this beer. So we had this beer in Tank 7, which was the base beer for this saison bread. And bread is wild yeast, and Saccharomyces is cultivated yeast. Well, the cultivated yeast acts like a dog. You tell it to sit, and it sits, and it's very well trained. The bread is like a cat. When you tell it to sit, it'll scratch you. So we were trying to work with this Brettanomyces, a wild yeast, and it wasn't really behaving like we wanted. So we had all this beer sitting in Tank 7. And every night I would go home, I would see our brewers sitting on the patio drinking this beer from Tank 7. I'm like, what's up with this? They're like, this is fantastic beer. Why do we not put this in a bottle? This is too good for not putting it in a bottle. So I talked to our marketing people, and they wanted to call it something like the Poet of the Plains or something like that. And I'm like, no, this is beer that sits in Tank 7, and the name is going to be Tank 7. That's the only time I ever named the beer. And so Tank 7 was born. And it's been a big success for us. It's, like I said, probably the best-selling saison right now in the US. Maybe because it's 8.5% alcohol. Maybe because it tastes so good. Maybe because it's, I don't know. But it's a very easy drinking beer. And it really put this with any kind of meal, and you'll be surprised how well it pairs with basically about anything. With charcuterie, salami, with cheese, anything.
Jeff, you got anything to add?
Well, since you brought up Brettanomyces, I'm just kind of, so Brettanomyces is one of those yeasts that works over a period of months to years. There's a lot of brewers that believe that as soon as a beer leaves the brewery, it's ready to drink. How do you feel about cellaring a beer, particularly maybe one with Brettanomyces in it?
Well, we used to make, so we don't make Saison Brett, we don't make it anymore, unfortunately. But when a beer with Brett, I'm okay with having that aging. A sour beer that's been, with foeder or barrel-aged beer, I'm fine with aging it. Other than that, I'm not a big fan of aged beers. We bottle condition most of our beers. Like Tank 7 is also can conditioned and bottle conditioned. But, when it gets to about, 5 months or so, I start smelling some of those oxidation characteristics, some of those honey, bready notes that we as a brewer really don't want in that beer, So I'm not a big fan of aging beer, personally. And if you do it, do it cool temperature, dark, don't keep beer in your car. There's no reason to.
Did you want to do the whiskey first or the bourbon first on these next?
Yeah. So those two are, we have about 5,000 whiskey barrels in our plant, in our warehouse. I should send you a picture of those because it's pretty impressive. 5,000 barrels sitting on a rack. And the two main beers that we make is Bourbon Barrel Quad and Whiskey Barrel Stout. The Whiskey Barrel Stout is basically, it's an imperial stout that's aged in whiskey barrels, and we blend it back with a little bit of fresh beer because we noticed that if it's just 100% of the beer is barrel aged, it's too much, and that way it's a little bit more drinkable. The Bourbon Barrel Quad is basically our 6th class, which is a quadruple, Belgian style quadruple that we age in bourbon barrels. And then as the beer ages, we add cherries to the beer in the barrels. So basically cherry puree. And that really adds a total different dimension to the beer. So if you taste the Whiskey Barrel Stout, which is good in itself, a lot of the characteristic that you get is the roast, coffee, a lot of vanilla, oakiness. So thank you.
This is Sarah. She's a really good customer of ours. She wanted to join in.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, you just made my day. But so, I mean, it's really complex beer. But then when you try the Bourbon Barrel Quad next to it, because we put the cherries in it, it all of a sudden it gets a little bit of acidity and a lot more fruitiness. And I always compare it to the Whiskey Barrel Stout being like a 2-dimensional beer, very rich, but it's all somewhat on the same platform. But then when you taste the Bourbon Barrel Quad, all of a sudden you have that fruitiness and that cherry in it and the acidity. And all of a sudden you have almost like a 3-dimensional beer, And it's amazing how a little bit of addition of some small things can make a big difference in a beer.
Yeah, that's fun. This is an amazing pairing for like a chocolate dessert or, I don't know. I can think of a lot of things that I would love to have this with. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's fun.
And I think we're one of the only breweries that have these available in a 4-pack year round. A lot of breweries will release whiskey, barrel-aged beers on a very limited amount, but for us, we have these year-round. And actually, we thought that during COVID that these beers would kind of slow down, and they have just been amazing. They've been grown so much. I think it has to be with people like, what, I'm going to be home. If I'm home, I am going to drink a darn good beer, and those are the ones that I'm going to drink.
Yeah.
So it's been great.
Cool.
Having these barrel-aged beers.
Jeff, you got any questions on these last two?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Are those the last two we're talking about?
Yeah. And then we have some other ones in there, but we just wanted to go through, 6 or so because people get bored eventually.
Eventually.
If Steven knows anything about Boulevard wine, I thought that was an interesting story.
The Boulevard wine, yeah. We've done so many things over the years. So John bought he bought a piece of land with an old farm on it. No, actually, I didn't have a farm, but it was duck hunting. And we, at this time, at the same time, we started this the building next door, which has the new brew house in it. And in Missouri, if you're a winery, you can sell beer also on your premise. So as a winery, you can sell wine, you can sell beer, you can sell anything for touristic reasons, you know, because a lot of these wineries are in the country, and just to make sure that people come and visit these wineries. So it's kind of a loophole in taxation, I guess. So as we became a winery also, we were able to have a venue on at the brewery, which otherwise we couldn't. So we have a venue here at the brewery. Actually, we have three, let me see, 1, 2, 3 event spaces at the brewery for weddings and other kinds of stuff, and great for marketing. So because we're a winery, we could serve our own beer. Otherwise, we weren't able to do that. Now laws have changed, but in 2006 we needed that. So we started making wine, and the wine was never fantastic. You know, growing grapes in Missouri, especially if you try to grow vinifera, Cabernet Franc, it was hard. It was hard. And, you know, a winemaker will tell you that the grapes are 90% of what's in the bottle. The other 10% is craftsmanship or really screwing it up. And I think there wasn't a lot of craftsmanship around yet for making wine. Plus, the grapes we got were not the greatest neither. I still have a couple of these bottles in my basement. I should open one up one of these days. We had one great year that the grapes were really fantastic. But out of 10 years, that was the only one. And then eventually we were like, okay, we're going to make cider. That's easier. We'll just get some apple juice and ferment it, you know? So.
So Sarah has a question about the painting behind you. She likes it. She wants to know if she could buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can I say? I don't know. It's been here in my office for since I moved in here. Actually,
I love it.
I need to put a nail in the wall so I can hang it because it's just sitting there.
Well, you've only been there 22 years. I mean, you still got time.
Right? So, yeah. I mean, this is the painting of the brewery.
Yeah, it's cool.
Awesome. Love it.
That is beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Stephen. Do you have anything else to add? Otherwise, we'll let you go and get back to work. But
yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this. It's fun. I really hope that this COVID is over very soon so I can come visit you and do some rafting while I'm out there, some canoeing.
have you been to Montana before?
No, I need to.
Yeah, you're right. We have a river running right through our town, and it's fly fishing and rafting and all kinds of fun. So yeah, you're welcome to get out here. We'll do our first beer dinner with you if you'd like. That'd be great.
Yeah, there you go. I think we just organized something here.
All right, perfect. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thank
Talk
you
to you
very
soon.
much. All
You
the
bet.
best.
Thank you.
Hope to
Thank
see you in
you.
Montana.
Bye.
Bye.